Welcome to the Feria TechCast, where we'll bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. Today, we are joined by Grant McCracken, founder at DarkHorse Security, where he's making cybersecurity accessible and affordable for organizations of all sizes and budgets. With 13 plus years in cybersecurity as an ethical hacker and executive, including the VP of Ops at Bocrowd. He has led teams including customer success, services, pen testing, security operations, support, hacker success, solution architecture, and more. So, Grant, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. So you have a fascinating 13-year journey from ethical hacker to executive founder. So tell us, what was the pivotal moments that made you decide to start Dark Horse Security?
Sure. Yeah. There's no like really great pivotal moment type situation. I had worked in this space for about a dozen years. And so at the time that I left my last organization, I was like, okay, what do I do now? Right. And so if you sit around and you think about, okay, it's kind of a logical extension that like, and I wanted to do something a little bit good too. And so where could I do the most good? And what am I going to be most effective at? Right. I could go try to save the polar bears or something like that, but I'm not particularly skilled at, saving polar bears or things of that nature. I don't know the first thing about it. So, what I do know is security. And so if I want to do good and I want to have maximal effectiveness in terms of, where I'm going to have the most impact, and it just kind of stands to reason that I should do something with security. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll go build a security platform that makes these solutions easier and easier to use, more accessible, and more affordable for organizations.
Well, that's great. So tell us, what is Dark Horse about and who is it really for?
Yeah, so Dark Horse is the goal with Dark Horse is to make, and you kind of touched on it earlier. It's to make security, proactive security, accessible and affordable to organizations of all sizes and budgets. And what that means is, um, as an organization, right? You have a couple options, right? In today's era, right? You can you can take care of your security in terms of identifying vulnerabilities before hackers get to them and so on and so forth. Or you can just kind of forget about security and not do anything. Right. And so, a lot of what smaller organizations do is they just don't really prioritize security because it's not, it's seen as like one, it's complicated, it's expensive, it's onerous and all these things. And so, they're less likely, I mean, if you make something hard to do, right? So like if you talk about like, going to the gym, right? It's probably a decent analog there where, um, if people live 5 minutes from a gym, they're more likely to go to a gym. Right. If it's, on their drive home, they're more likely to do it. Right. So it has to be easy. It has to be, it has to be something that doesn't take a whole lot of activation energy to get to. If you have to go drive an hour to go get to the gym, right, you're less likely to go. And so, the same concept here, right? I mean, because going to the gym is good for you, having good security hygiene is good for you. Um, so, uh, the whole goal of Dark Horse is just to make it accessible and affordable, make it, you know, not onerous for organizations to, be proactive with their security.
Well, that's interesting. So you talked about how small organizations do not really prioritize proactive security, partly because maybe they think it's quite expensive. So tell us, why do you think smaller organizations actually have to have to prioritize proactive security in their business?
Sure. I mean, the first reason why, and the reason that first comes to mind for most organizations is, do you want to stay in business? Right. I mean, if you have a bounty of options in the market, and you have, all things being equal, this company just got hacked and this other company hasn't gotten hacked. Same price, same deliverables, there's nuances, but which one are you going to go with? Right. So fundamentally, do you want to stay in business? You also have an obligation to your users to protect their information. And that's more sort of second order kind of thing, but it's something that, and it's not something that, every organization has top of mind, but they do. Right. And again, that informs the decision making that users have, right? If you're an application that just got hacked and all your, information got leaked, your users can't necessarily trust you. People aren't going to come running to use you. Your former users may not come back as well. Right? So again, it's a lot about, I mean, ultimately it kind of all ties back to, do you want to stay in business? But within that, right, you have an obligation to protect their information on top of, your desire to, stay in business.
Uh, Fantastic. So, the mission for DarkHorse Security is to make proactive cybersecurity accessible. So, tell us, how is the traditional cybersecurity model broken, and how does your approach with DarkHorse Security specifically fix it for smaller organizations?
Sure. I mean, so the traditional model is a consultative model, right? And that's where, say, you go to a big four or some other consultancy and you say, hey, I need a penetration test. And they're going to say, okay, you're going to have this long scoping process. It's going to cost you a bunch of time. It's going to cost you a bunch of money. It's going to take weeks to months to get running, all these things, right? That, in my view, is broken. It's archaic. It's the same way it's been delivered for the last 40 years. If you've been doing something the same way for 40 years, other than, I don't know, delivering exceptional service or something like that, I don't know, everything, even like plumbing. If you were, even if you're a plumber doing the same techniques as 40 years ago, might have some questions using the same tools and techniques, right? Everything's moving forward. And so I think that, in my view, I think that's inefficient. It's broken. And what Dark Horse does that makes it more efficient and less broken is we make it so that anybody can come in, answer a few questions. You don't even have to talk to a salesperson. You can just say, "Oh, okay, I want a penetration test. Here's my specifications for that." Get that done in like 15 minutes, right? So no long sales process, no having to go back and forth, building a giant SOW, things like that. You can pay quickly and easily with a credit card if that's what you want to do. And then, we're able to launch your pen test within a matter of days or hours, right? Again, you can't do that with consultative types of engagements where they have a bench and they book you months out into the future. And so all of that, right? All of those extra nuances to the that are required in the consultative model end up also increasing the cost, right? And so as a function of also, it's just a fancy, nice byproduct that, it's faster, it's easier, it's less work, and it's also as a function of all that, it becomes cheaper. And so not only is it, again, easier, but also more affordable at the same time. So that's how we're changing the model.
Wonderful. So, tell us, how has the threat landscape evolved most significantly in the last few years? And what do you think every organization should be aware of now?
Sure. I mean, uh the obvious answer to, how has the threat landscape changed is AI, right? Without question, right? I mean, like, you've got more attackers being able to elevate their game with AI. You have more security solutions. You have more attack surface as a function of it. You're writing more code more quickly. Chatbots are popping up everywhere. All these sorts of things. You got AI in your Microsoft Office situation, in your SharePoint, overly sharing things and whatnot. Um, so that's the first answer, right? That's how the threat landscape has changed, obviously. And then what do organizations need to be thinking about? The same damn things they should have been thinking about before AI, even, because AI is a sub function of that, in my view. right? So like everybody wants to, you don't change your focus as a function of, there's fundamentals to how you manage security, right? And so, and my recommendation obviously is always to, not obviously, but my recommendation is to use a framework. And if you're using a framework, the framework doesn't change. Nuances within that framework can have adjustments over time, but as an organization, for instance, if you're thinking about, implementing AI or an AI solution from someone, who still go through all the same, processes. You say, okay, what data does this have access to? What data should it have access to? How, what kind of rules and guardrails do we have around it? Have we tested it to make sure that it's secure? If we're implementing it as part of a, a supply chain conversation, right? Is everything upstream secure? So on and so forth. I don't think, it's really tempting to be like, oh, everybody needs to go focus on AI because that's got a ton of risks. Sure, it does. But what organizations need to focus on, in my view, is the fundamentals, right? Do the fundamentals right. So, and then everything else kind of follows from that. So, if you have a good security program or policy or set of processes around, how you adopt new features and stuff like that, then that'll also apply to AI, and you'll be just fine, right? So, that's my 2 cents on what organizations need to be thinking about. Again, it's the same fundamental stuff. I mean, even in the age of AI, 68% of data breaches start at the human layer. So again, part of your good security process is having good training and making sure people aren't sending or falling for phishing attacks or sending sensitive information out of the corporate environment and stuff like that. So um hopefully that answers both those questions. Let me know if you want me to go deeper on either one of them.
Well, I'd like to talk a bit more about AI. So, speaking of AI, what do you see the future of AI in cybersecurity? Yeah, there are two sides of it. There's the bad guys who try to hack companies or organizations, and there are the good guys like you who want to protect these organizations and businesses. So, who do you see AI helping more? Is it both sides, or is it advantageous to one side?
I mean, again, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? And so this is nothing new, right? And yes, it is new, just so we're clear on that. But in security, we've always had this cat and mouse game where, you have your attackers and they're constantly looking for new attack vectors, new vulnerabilities. Um, and they'll find something and then it gets patched. And they'll find something else and it gets patched. And so, it's still the same cat and mouse thing where, I right now, right, in the early stages of anything, the attackers have the advantage, right? Because there's never a situation, just for the sake of, I don't know, saying something depressing or something whatnot, but like there's never a situation where you're ahead of the hackers. Like that just doesn't exist, right? When you're right, you're not like, oh, the hackers will catch up in 5 years. It's never that way. You're always reacting to the hackers. It's not like, okay, now we can rest. No, the hackers are innovating and always trying to find new attack vectors, and you're always going to be responsive to that. That's just reality. And so, um, so being in the early stages, early innings of this AI situation, attackers have the advantage because they're much more agile, right? You don't have to go through, I don't know, you don't have to go get a procurement request from Debbie, or you don't have to get procurement approved from Debbie and finance to be able to get this security tool that's going to help you secure AI. As an attacker, you're just like, nah, I'm just going to use this stuff. And so the attackers are much more quick to adopt these toolings and sort of leverage them in nefarious ways, in ways that, again, they simply don't have the constraints of a corporate organization where you have, manpower constraints in terms of, how many hours you can dedicate or resources or, expertise and things like that. Um, so, uh, the original question was, um, around who's winning, right? Again, I mean, who has the advantage, right? Attackers. Is anybody
Yeah,
winning?
yeah.
If anybody's winning, it's obviously, in my view, the attackers. There's a lot of innovative things coming out regarding AI from a defensive perspective, but again, a lot of that defensive stuff is still reactive, and it's still kind of the same game, right? Again, it's just new attack surface, and you're just playing cat and mouse. And so um hopefully that answers that question. I'm happy to go a little bit deeper if you want.
Well, I think you did justice in answering the question there. At least I'm satisfied with the response I got. I hope the listeners will be too. Moreover, if they are not, they'll definitely be able to contact you to maybe discuss more about it. So, moving on, Grant, what's the most surprising or ingenious vulnerability that you've seen ethical hackers discover?
Huh. I'm trying to think, right, about what's the coolest vulnerability I've seen. I mean, we've seen a lot of really interesting stuff over the years. I'm coming up blank on like the coolest vulnerability because when you explain things, right, well, like, I mean, you know, there's always a bunch of clever stuff. For instance, this isn't like the coolest vulnerability you've ever seen, and it wasn't even like the craziest thing, but I mean, there's just like a ton of these little small examples. I'll give you one where we were testing a security camera, um, or just a an IoT, a connected camera. Um, you'd put it in your house or your garage or on the edge, of, wherever, and um, it would read QR codes for like setup or something like that. And so an attacker created a QR code that convinced it to, perform code execution. And so it's just a really interesting example of like, the developers like, oh yeah, we'll have like a QR code, it'll read it and then it'll go perform, it'll go connect to some Wi-Fi or something like that. And they didn't even think about the fact that like an attacker would create a malicious QR code and put it up to the camera, and it's like, oh, okay, I see it's a QR code. I'll go read the QR code and I'll do what the QR code says to go do, and then you end up with a vulnerability there. There's just a ton of those. There's no shortage of people who came in and over you know 13 years that I've seen that they're like, oh, our thing's not vulnerable, and hackers just trash it, or they find creative ways around stuff people have built. Um, it's just a testament to human ingenuity. Again, a lot of this stuff is just super creative in terms of you think about, okay, this person can access this resource, what about what this person can do, or what if I've used this functionality in this certain way, and you just most people just don't think of it, and least of all developers, which is how you get vulnerabilities. Um and uh yeah, so I don't know if that is particularly compelling as a story, but there's just a lot of human ingenuity is a key component to any good security testing program, because there's just things that people can think of that um, developers haven't necessarily considered and may not even already be like vulnerability classification. There's no standard vulnerability classification for you know reading QR codes. It's just came up with the idea and found a vulnerability.
Well, that's a really interesting one there. So, tell us, Grant, what does proactive security actually mean in practice? So, beyond just running a penetration test.
Sure. So in security, there's two sides to things. So there's we typically talk about red team and blue team. Red team's offensive, blue team's defensive. Proactive security is kind of this view that we should be proactive in terms, not necessarily defensive or offensive. We should just be proactive in terms of our security. And so there's a lot of different things that go into proactive security. For instance, It's understanding your assets, right? So, what assets do you have exposed to the internet that attackers can hack, right? So you're being proactive in understanding that. Okay, so you understand your asset. What vulnerabilities do those assets have? You're categorizing those assets to understand, are they do they have highly sensitive information, so on and so forth. You're being proactive, right? That's not necessarily like if you try to like put that in a bucket, right? Just talking about like identifying your assets and then, what has what risks. Uh, that's not inherently defensive. I mean, it could be, right? You can make an argument that like anything you do from a security perspective is defensive. Okay, fine. Right. Like it's not, all encompassing. And then from the offensive side, you could also make an argument that like everything's offensive. And so proactive security, I think in my view, is just a more it's a better term for these sorts of activities that you're doing to prevent yourself from getting hacked. Which again, you can make the argument that like running antivirus is preventative and proactive, right? And sure, it is, right? But um, so it's just a shift in that mindset away from like, is it red or is it blue? It's everything should be proactive in terms of because again when you're looking at it from like a blue team perspective, you're kind of reacting to things, right? If you're defensive, right? And in even technically installing the act of like installing you know endpoint protection or antivirus or something like that, you sure that's like proactive in nature, but fundamentally what that thing does is it's reactive, right? Something comes into the endpoint and it says, oh, should this be here, should it not, or somebody's doing something on the endpoint, right? Like should this activity be allowed, right? So like that's reactive, right? So how can we be proactive in our approach to security to more actively identify those things? So again, it's all of security is a little nebulous, and it's still, is you can believe it, very much the Wild West, and everybody's got their own definitions for things. But that's why I think, from my view, proactive security is a much it's a more informed view on security as opposed to just kind of red team, blue team, security in general.
Fantastic. So, tell us, Grant, what has been the biggest challenge in transition from being a practitioner and executive to now being a founder?
Sure. Um, Biggest thing is you're selling a lot more than you would have otherwise. When you start something, you are selling all the time, and for better or worse. So that's definitely not really what I expected to be doing, and so that's been the biggest transition. Is that it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're selling. You're selling all the time. Um, you know, you're talking to investors. You're selling. You're talking to potential prospects. You're selling. You're talking to you know everything, even this, right? I mean, I'm going on these podcasts because I'm selling, right? Like I want people to know that we exist, that I exist, and that we're doing these things in this way, and they should maybe use us. Um, you know that that again, that's just like not necessarily what everybody thinks about when you think about building a business, right? You think about like writing code and doing innovative things and all sorts of other stuffs, but not especially when you're starting, it's a whole lot of selling.
Wonderful. So, if you could get every organization to change one common insecure behavior, what would it be?
um I mean, that's tough because the answer I want to give is that they need to be more proactive with their security. Simple, straightforward, right? And I guess if I had to, pick one answer, I'd just cheat and go with that. And obviously, there's like a billion things underneath proactive security. But outside of that, right, the data I gave earlier, 60%, 68% of data breaches start at the human layer. So I would say that organizations should focus at the human layer. If there's one thing for you to do, you gotta secure your humans. first, and that has a lot of downstream impact as well. For instance, if you secure your humans, then your humans are more likely to write maybe more secure code and do other things that make security more top of mind for the organization, and that eliminates vulnerabilities elsewhere as well. So um, those would be my answers, right? If again, I'm not sure how precise that is, in relation to what you were looking for.
Well, that's quite straightforward and precise. Moving on, Grant. Okay, looking back on your career, what's the most important lesson that you learned from a security incident or failure?
Security incidents, again, I mean, it's just fundamentals, right? Just do the basic things, right? That's the biggest security lesson. Um, uh, in terms of failures, right? Expectations. Everything is everything is expectation, right? And I know that sounds like reductionist, but if you think about it, every disagreement or disappointment or issue or frustration is a result of misaligned expectation, right? So if I say I'm gonna go uh you know change the oil on my car or something like that, and I expect the wrench to break, I expect to spend 6 hours trying to get the oil filter off because the last person that put it on there was, Superman. That changes my disposition. I'm like, okay, this is going to take 6 hours to get this oil filter off, and if I get it off in 2 hours, then I'm happy about it, right? It's my expectations that were misaligned, right? And so but if my expectation is that it comes off within 5 seconds and it doesn't, then I'm going to be frustrated. I'm going to be mad. Same thing goes for, doing anything. If I expect that, if the client expects, again, setting expectations is obviously the thing here. Where if I set the expectation with the client that it'll take a certain amount of time and it takes longer than that certain amount of time, the client's going to be frustrated. If I set the expectation, but conversely, right? If I deliver early, then they're going to be happier, right? And so much of what we do in human interaction, even just in relationships, right? If I set the expectation with my wife that I will be available and then I'm not available, then she's going to be mad. But so anyways, failures, just general life work stuff. You learn that through failures, as it were, where expectations weren't managed with clients or whatnot, and so just making sure that you understand what their expectations are, because if you don't ask, they may not tell you, and they may be expecting something that you just never, you're thinking one thing, they're thinking another thing, and you get misaligned expectations. So, expectations, expectations, expectations.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, part of the theme of this podcast is centered around innovation. So, for that reason, there's a common question I like to ask every guest that I interview here on the show. So, tell us, what does innovation mean to you, and how does it relate to your field? I mean, in the context of cybersecurity.
What does innovation mean to me? Means innovating. It means, you're pushing the boundaries, right? You're trying to, you're challenging the status quo. Um, you're looking at things a little different, and that's kind of, dare I say, table stakes in security, because that is what security is all about, right? You're hacking. You're always pushing the boundaries. You're always trying to break something. Um, innovation is just pushing the boundaries, right? Trying to see where we can go next, right? And it's not always successful, just so we're clear on that, but you're always trying to build, or expand what's going on, right? So that's that's kind of my view on what innovation is.
That's interesting. So, finally, tell us, where can our listeners go learn more about DarkHorse Security and the resources that you offer?
Sure. If you want to learn more about Dark Horse Security, go to darkhorse.sh. Um, and you can read about what we offer and how we do it and whatnot. If you want to connect with me directly, I am Grant McCracken. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also email me at grant@darkhorse.sh. We're our goal, like we talked about earlier with Dark Horse, is to make security accessible for organizations of all sizes and budgets. And um, so, in the event that you want to get more secure with your organization's cybersecurity, but you may be cost constrained or time constrained or any sort of constraint, we'd still love to help. We'd love to have a conversation, right? Our goal is not to make a ton of money. Our goal is to kind of just try to make orgs more secure. So even if you can't afford it, we're still here to help. I'm happy to do stuff pro bono. I've got hackers that'll also work pro bono, so on and so forth, right? Well, that's one thing about the hacking community is they really, we really care about, just making orgs more secure, right? We actually care about security, just because we live it on a day to day basis. So, yeah, hopefully that helps.
Amazing, Grant. It's been a really wonderful conversation with you, and I am excited to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having the conversation, asking me questions. So, yeah.